Yes, just to show, tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, I'll be talking to some people in Adelaide in Australia, advising on engineering. So yes, I am still active in that field. One day I'll retire. Tonight though, we're going to talk about powered by the River Avon. And we're going to talk about the River Avon between Pulteney Weir and the Twerton weirs. So that's what we're going to be looking at. That's probably the earliest photograph we've got of Pulteney Weir. This is it's one of Francis Lockley's photographs. It's an image which I think it's familiar and yet very different. Of course, there's no Empire Hotel. The weir itself is very different. The colonnades are not there, but there's Pulteney Bridge. So that's the earliest picture we've got of the weir itself. And the talk's going to go to the other extreme. Is down to what's happening at Twerton, the Twerton Gate. We've got Western Lock over here for those online, over looking at the picture on the left-hand side, and the gates which are part of the flood protection system on the right. Within this talk, I've actually got more slides that we can talk about tonight. So I'm going to talk for about 45-50 minutes, and then we'll stop where is a good point. But the story does go on to its ultimate conclusion of when the flood protection scheme comes in. So that's what we're going to be doing this evening. So there's the River Avon. It starts up near Malmesbury, and that's where its source is, comes round in a big sweep, and then discharges into the River Severn, the other side of Bristol. So that's the whole of the River Avon. It's really a drain out of this area, which is why the river goes up and down so quickly. Now the bit we're interested in is this little square here as it comes through Bath. If we zoom in on that, what we see is there's a map of it today. We come round from the right hand side, sweep down under Pulteney Bridge, over Pulteney Weir there, come round past the railway station, and then it sweeps out towards Twerton, where there is the Western Cut. More about that shortly. That's what it looks like today. If you go back to 1742, Thomas Thorpe produced a map of 5 miles around Bath, and this is his map. Now, if we zoom in on that, the first thing you can see there's Bath, quite a small city, bounded by the old city walls. And if we look at that square there, that is Pulteney Weir. And in 1742, we can see 2 sets of mills. There's a mill on the Bathwick side, Bathwick Mills, and there's a mill on the city side, which on this map is called the Town Mills. So there's those 2 mills there. And if we sweep all the way through to Twerton, which in 1742 was called Twerton, the 2 weirs. I'm told it's probably not true, but it's a good story. Is that it was Brunel who changed the name. Because when he brought the railway through, he had a problem. He had a Tiverton and a Twerton on the timetable, and it would confuse people. So he persuaded the good people of Twerton to call their place Twerton. Probably not true, but it's a good story. But there we can see Twerton, the 2 weirs, and there's actually 2 weirs, an upper and a lower weir. And this thing called the Western Cut, which is that short passage of water above it, which is part of the Avon navigation to make the river navigable from Bath out to Bristol. But also sweeping past there, there's also a number of mills powered by the small streams, basically the Lynn Brook and the Smolcombe Brook. And there's at least 4 mills down on the southwestern part of the city. I'll talk about those in passing because I've got a whole talk purely on those mills, so I could spend a whole evening just talking about those. But they become part of the whole story. So what we're going to be looking at, there's a painting from 1805. We can see Pulteney Bridge to get your reference, and then we can see the Monk's Mill, or the Town Mill, sitting on the city side, and Bathwick Mill sitting just behind the Great Pulteney Street on the Bathwick side. Also, we'll be touching fleetingly on these 4 sites. We've got 4 mills off small streams. I won't say more about those now because I'll talk about them shortly, but 4 sites there to look at. And then we'll go down to Twerton and Western, the 2 sides of the river. And we'll talk about the upper mills and the lower mills, which became quite a hive of industry in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So that's the extent of our talk. So let's go into the, without further ado, let's get into the detail. So also, where the story could carry on, is that western cut I spoke about is part of the Avon navigation. And that still exists today, dates from 1727. But that predates by about 80 years the Kennet-Avon Canal. And of course then we get the Kennet-Avon Canal joining the river. And from there we then see water power giving over to steam. And we see Camden Mill, which is a steam-powered flour mill, and Dorchester Street Power Station. So that's, if we get time, we'll go on to those, but I think we'll probably stop time-wise once we get to the Western Cut. So that's where everything could get to. So the first thing to understand is types of water wheel. The type of water wheel has got to relate to the topography of the region. So what we see is, if we look at the River Avon, so take the River Avon, and what I've done there is I've scaled down the length, but kept the same height. So that from the Keynsham up to Claverton, that is the fall of the River Avon, somewhat foreshortened to show you the steps in the river. And you can see the different steps are different heights, and that dictates what sort of water wheel you put in. That's the bit we're looking at. This is Pulteney Weir. Those are the two weirs at Twerton. So that's our bit to look at this evening. Now, the types of water wheel we might see are undershot, where the water is coming in under the wheel, breastshot, where the water is coming in at the height of the wheel, overshot and backshot, where the water comes in at the top of the wheel, and then latterly a turbine, where in the late 1800s we start using turbine technology and can actually increase the efficiency for quite a low fall of head. The other thing you see, this figure N50, 20, 50, 70, that's the efficiency of the wheel. More about that shortly to see how these different wheels are used. So let's look at them in action. First of all, as was said earlier, I've spent quite a lot of time down at Saltford Mill trying to understand that mill. And Saltford, what we've got is quite a low fall of water. It's only 3 foot 1 inches, 0.94 metres in Newmany. But the thing about an undershot wheel is you hold the water back and you turn the potential energy of the river into kinetic energy and squirt it at the wheel and push the wheel round. It's quite spectacular, but very inefficient. Only about 20% of the available energy in the wheel, in the water, is given into the wheel. So it's all right for when you're on the River Avon because you've got a lot of water and you're not too worried about efficiency. So that's why Saltford is powered by, or was powered by 4 undershot wheels. And the one wheel that still remains working actually drives an electric dynamo, and that dynamo is scaled to 11 kilowatts. So this one water wheel can drive 11 kilowatts. If we look at a map, this is the 1903 Ordnance Survey map of Saltford. So it's very confusing because of the bend in the river. Saltford Mill sits on Kelston Weir, and when you go around the corner, Kelston Mill sits on Saltford Weir. So this is Kelston Weir and Kelston Lock with the brass mill. And you can see you've got quite a lot of civil engineering. We've got a long dam, a long weir to hold the water back, and then this, what's called the head race, driving the water down to the mill, into the mill itself, and then the tail race where it comes out the other end and back into the river. And this is probably, the bank of the river was probably, going back to Saxon times, was down, straight down, and so all this is dug out. This is all man-made. That's incidentally the Great Western Railway coming in later on. And there's a photograph taken about 1930, and we can see there the weir coming across the picture with its low fall of about 3 foot 1 inches, and the lock over there, which is part of the Avon navigation, and here's Saltford Mill. It's quite interesting, in the height of summer, when the river is relatively low, if I opened all 4 gates in the mill, I could actually take over the river, and I could dry out the weir and take all the water through the mill. And that's an important thing to note, that the mill owners had first call on the water. And so owning the water rights was very valuable. And we'll see more of that shortly. So there's the undershot wheel at Saltford. Now, if we go to the other end, we've got another sort of water mill still operating, and that's out at Claverton, water-driven pumping station for lifting water from the river into the Kennet and Avon Canal. Now there, because we've got the water higher, the dam wall is now 5 foot 10 inches high, and so that gives us a much higher head of water. And we can now get the water up to the axle height of the wheel, which is called breast shot. And what we've got at Claverton Pumping Station, a very large wheel, but that can deliver about just short of 18 kilowatts. But it lifts 18,500 gallons of water an hour, 48 feet into the canal. But because we've got the water higher up, we're now using the weight of the water to drive the wheel round, and we can now get about 50% of the energy in the river out into the wheel. So more efficient, but still using the river. And there is the Claverton pumping station. What you can see there is rather than having the 4 small wheels like we have at Saltford, we've got one very large wheel. And that's drawing that water off, and then the device over there is the pump itself for lifting water from the river up into the canal. So there is, now if we look at a photograph of that, there is the weir, and we can see it's a much higher weir than at Saltford. And in fact, if you look along the top of the weir, you can see like a step. And that's because when they built the pumping station, they actually raised the weir another 9 inches, I think it was, to give them that extra bit of head to get the efficiency up. But of course, by doing that, they raised the head of the water all the way back up the river, and so the next mill up loses that head of water. So swinged in roundabouts, one person's win is another person's loss. And that's the mill from the outside. And again, we can see quite a lot of civil engineering. We've got an island, we've got a long dam wall, and then we've got the leat, the head race and the tail race, taking the water back into the river. So that's our breast shot wheel. Now if we can get the water even higher, if we can get it to the top of the wheel, with a pitchback wheel we can get about 70% efficiency, with an overshot wheel about 90% efficiency. And that's to do with how much water you lose out of the wheel. So there are our high efficiency pitchback and overshot wheels. Now, the way you would use that, you would build those sorts of mills on the side of a hillside. We've got a stream coming down the hillside, and you build a dam and create a mill pond holding that water back. And then you get what's called a flume, which is normally a timber chute, which draws that water across to the top of the wheel. So we're now using the topography of the land to get the water well up in the air to drive that wheel. And those sorts of wheels have been around for a long time. This is the Luttrell Salter from about 1330. And there we can see the head race, the flume, and the overshot wheel. We can also see eel traps in the river, which we know we had at Saltford as well. So it's been around for a long time. And there are still examples around which are now in heritage sites. Coombe Mill, if anybody's a Landmark Trust fan, you can stay in the mill owner's or the miller's cottage at Coombe, and there is the overshot wheel. And if you go a bit further round to Coverdale, there is another overshot wheel with the flume. So those are examples of overshot wheels. And probably the largest one in Britain was actually not too far from here. That at Coombe Down, there was De Montalt Mills, a paper mill. And there was a wheel 56 feet in diameter with a small channel coming down across these pylons through a pipe to drive that wheel round. So a small flow of water, but a large diameter. And in fact, if you walk down towards Tucking Mill, you can still see these pylons are still there, which held that pipe. This then became was gentrified as a grand design project, which you probably can see on YouTube now. So that was the largest wheel in England at the time. And then in the late 1800s, we start to see turbines coming in. Now a turbine, either a Francis turbine is one type of turbine, quite a small head of water, only about a metre and a bit, but we can get an 80% efficiency out of that wheel. And these became very popular. A lot of these were made at Ringwood, down towards Southampton, and we see them on a lot of the rivers around this area. That's what it looks like, a drawing from the late 1800s of what the turbine looked like. And I say at Ringwood, there were 2 of these on the river there with a 4-foot fall of water, and they could produce about 50 horsepower, about just short of 80 kilowatts. And the efficiency around about 80%. So that is the turbine. And if you go down to Telesford on the River Froome, there is still one sitting on the bank there with yours truly stood alongside it. So that's what the turbines look like. So that's what we're looking for. Those are the sorts of mills. So where were they? So the first thing, if we go to the Domesday Survey, 1086, this is a list of entries from the survey. Now remember, the Domesday Survey is a tax return. The king's looking to see what he can tax. So these mills are actually probably all Saxon mills. These were around before the Norman conquest. And if we put those onto a quick table and scale them in terms of the rateable value of the community, we can see we get Bath at the top, Keynsham second, with their 2 abbeys, then Twerton, Bathwick, Lincoln, and down we come. Also down the side here, we can see a number of mills. So if we reorder that and actually look at the mills, what we see is Bath, and look at their rateable value. Bath again is at the top with its 1 mill. Keynsham has got 8 mills associated with the abbey, but then we see Twerton with 4 mills, Woolley out of the other side of the city, Bathwick with its mill, and Lincoln with 2 mills. So those are the mills that we're interested in. Those are the ones on the River Avon. So the earliest mills are going to grain corn, flour or grist, depending on what your product is. If you want high quality bread, you're into flour. If you want animal feed, you're into grist. So it depends on the quality of what you want. Now, what that mill would have looked like is something like this. This actually is Stratford Mill. Stratford Mill was originally under what is now the Chew Magna Reservoir. And in 1950, when they were building the reservoir, they actually rescued the mill and rebuilt it stone by stone in the grounds of Blaise Castle in Bristol. And so it's still there. It's not open. It's sadly fallen into quite a bit of disrepair, but it's still there. And this is a sketch from 1954 of the internals of the mill. And so this is typically what our flour mills are looking like. We've got a water wheel, and that drives what's called the pit wheel, a big wheel, which then drives to 90 degrees to the wallower. The wallower is then driving this central shaft. Off the wallower, we then get the great spur wheel, and that great spur wheel drives into the stone nuts. And the stone nuts, typically 2 or 3 of them, drive the grindstones. So then we get the grindstones. But a mill is a 3-dimensional machine, because the drive then carries on up to the top, where we get the crown wheel. And the crown wheel then drives a sack hoist. So basically the sack hoist lifts the grain up onto the top floor where it's sifted. It's then allowed to fall by gravity into the grindstone, which is driven by the water wheel. So that is typically what we'll be looking for in our flour mills. And there's a picture of the great pit wheel and the wallower and the stone nut. So this is the bottom of the mill. This is then the milling floor, where we can see we've got three grindstones. That's it all assembled. This hopper is bringing the raw material down into the grindstone. That's where the action happens. And then that is the grindstone itself. This is Lode Mill at Anglesey Abbey near Cambridge. And so this bit is static, and that bit at the top drives the top wheel, which produces the grinding action. So that's what our flour mill looks like. So let's try and see where they were on the ground. So the first thing, let's look at Pulteney Weir. We've got the map here from 1610, which probably a lot of us have seen. And here we can see the weir. It's well in action there, with Monk's Mill on the city side and Bathwick Mill on the opposite side of the river. And so that's what it looked like in 1610. If we come forward to the earliest Ordnance Survey map, this is from the map which dates between 1850 1860, updated to 1888. And here we can see the Pulteney Weir, as people who've lived in Bath before 1960 will remember it. And we can see on the Bathwick side, we've still got Bathwick Mill, which is an operating flour mill. On the city side, we've got Monk's Mill, the site of the mill. So we've still got quite a lot of echoes of those mills. And this is the weir that the photograph was taken that we saw back in the, well, it's almost contemporary with that picture, about 1850. If we jump forward to 1960, there's an aerial view of that area. We can now see that the Empire Hotel has arrived and the colonnades around it. And two bits I would draw your attention to. One is that bit of stone, which is now in Parade Gardens, which is the remains of the Monk's Mill. And also over here, before the flood protection scheme, that is the remains of Bathwick Mill. So there were still echoes of those there in 1960. Most of that now swept away with the flood protection scheme. And so if you look at the city of Bath, that we've got 1086, that Doomsday Survey, a mill there owned by the king. 1198, we see a royal charter granting the freedom from tolls to encourage the wool trade. So this is where Bath starts to become a wool city. That in 1270s, the wool trade is described as the jewel in the realm. This is where Britain is making its money. And supporting that, 1275, we see out at Lambridge, down the London Road, two fulling mills. Come on to what a fulling mill is in a minute, but it's part of that woolen industry. And if we go into Wigcombe, 1291, we see at Oslake's Mule, Adam the Fuller. So Fuller's going on in Wigcombe. And the 1350s is when the woolsack appears in Parliament. The Lord Chancellor sits on the wool bale to symbolise its importance. And 1387, we get Canterbury's Tales, The Wife of Bath. To quote Chaucer, her cloth was better than that of the famous cloth-making towns of Flanders. So this is at its peak. But by the 1550s, the wool trade's in decline. And by John Speed's map of 1610, it's very much in the back seat. So that's what Bath is looking like. But we want to look at this wool trade. Now, these are the steps in making a piece of cloth. Staple, sorting out your wool. Scribbling and carding, and then combing to get all your wool ready for spinning. Then the spinning itself. Then the weaving into cloth. Then fulling, which is actually to clean the wool and to felt it. And then tentering, which is to stretch it again to turn it into a good piece of cloth. Then gigging and napping, which is to clean the cloth up and to get rid of the nap on the wool, the fluff. Then you dye it and then turn it into clothing. Now on that, it's a very hydraulic operation until the 1200s, when we start seeing fulling being driven by water power. So that's the first thing to look for. What's fulling and what are fulling mills? Later on, the actions of carding, combing, spinning don't come until the 1790s. And we don't actually see napping till the 1800s, and then spinning doesn't come until the 1830s. So that is the scale of what's going on with machinery. So in Bath, first of all, we want to look at what's happening in the 1200s. And so this is what a fulling mill, or a tucking mill, or a walking mill looks like, depending on what part of the country you come from. That fulling, what you did was you took your woolen cloth after you've woven it, you put it into a box, and if you're lucky, you put fuller's earth in there. If you're unlucky, you put urine into there. And then the water wheel then drives these big hammers, lifts them, and pounds the cloth. Don't hit the desk. Pounds the cloth. And in doing that, it draws out the lanolin out of the wool and cleans the wool. Also, it swells the wool, so it turns into a felt. And so that's the quality of cloth that we wanted. So before this, the reason why it's called walking is that it would actually be done by men and women walking on top of the cloth to try and pound it out. I think that Tony Robertson says that was probably the worst job in the world, was walking the cloth in a tank full of urine. But that's another story. So that's what the fulling mills look like. And here at Bathwick, we can see, first of all, we see the Pulteney Bridge, but this is Bathwick Mill. with the two outlets, and the weir. There's a drawing from 1829, again the weir, and we can see clearly the two outlets from the mill. Now, if you look at Bathwick's history, again, we've got that mill there in 1068. It's on John Speed's map, 1611. 1696, we know on John Gilmore's map, there's a mill and a tenter frame. The tenter frame is after you've fulled your cloth, you stretch it out onto tenter hooks, and that lets the cloth dry to give you a flat, clean cloth. So that's what the tenter frames are. So you'll see tenter frames close to the fulling mills. And so we know that's happening in Bathwick. That mill is still there on Thorpe's map of 1742. We see a picture of it, we know in 1767 that it's now, there's actually two mills driven on that side of the river. There's a grist mill and a fulling mill. So two mills driven by the same bit of the river, separately occupied. And then 1787, we see that mill leased to the Pulteney estate, and then it's sublet to Fullers. And so the mill is leased to the mealmen, and the mealmen sublet it to the Fullers. And then 1792, we see a carding machine coming in. So we're starting to see now the machinery coming in to more of that process. More about what carding is in a minute. And then the gig mill. The gig is once you've tentered your cloth, you then use teasels originally, and you would stroke the cloth and raise what's called the nap. And so then you get a lot of fluff. Then with a pair of shears, you would cut that off to get a smooth, clean cloth. And so the gig mill was a way of taking those teasels into a mechanised machine full of a belt full of pins. And then 1815, John Beck leases more ground on that side of the river to become a cloth manufactory. But by 1839, at this end of the city, the wool trade had collapsed or had gone. And so that's what we will see at Bathwick. So we can see we've got a combination of those flour mills and also the fulling mills. And then, but all that was swept away in 1974 with the Bath Flood Alleviation Scheme. So if we look across the river to Monk's Mill, or Town Mill, depending on the time, again, there's that Doomsday survey there. That mill, at that point, it's owned by the Crown. That it features on John Speed's map. It features on Thomas Thorpe's map. We see it in a painting in 1798. We see it in an etching of 1829. It's still going. I haven't seen any evidence of it being a fulling mill. I think it's always been a flour mill. But I might be wrong on that, but more we'll see. 1870, we see steam power coming in to take over. When the river's low, use steam power. But the thing about steam, you bring in fire, and 1883, it burnt down. So end of mill. And again, that side in particular, swept away, all evidence swept away with the flood alleviation scheme. And so here's some pictures of it. There it is in 1795. Again, we can see Pulteney Bridge. There is the weir, and this in the middle is the Monk's Mill, the Town Mill, the Abbey in the background, and then the tail race here with a gentleman watering his horse in the tail race. And so there is the mill in 1795. Here it is in 1829, looking down the river, and again we can see the North Parade in the background, but here it is sitting in the corner of what is now Parade Gardens, looking across to Bathwick and Dolmeads. And here in 1870, we can see evidence of that steam mill, because we've now got a chimney sitting alongside the mill, driving to power a steam engine to take over from when the river's low. We can see this little picture, the river is very low, very little water going over the weir. And that is a picture, I think, of the mill after the mill had been knocked down. And we can see the remains of two water wheels sitting there. The paddles, the blades have long gone. There's still water coming through the sluice, but that's where the power would have come from. So the remains of that's now well underwater today. And that's what's left. That's the little bit of Monk's Mill sitting in Parade Gardens. And so there we can see we've got the weir coming round. If we then come round the corner, before we go down to Twerton, what we've got here is there's the Lynn Brook, which comes down, joins in by the Honda garage, and then runs down into the river in Wickham, with Ralph Allen's park up here and his fish ponds. And we've got the Smallcombe Brook running down, originally down into the river, opposite what is now St John's Church, down Ferry Lane. And here we've got 4 mills. The first of all, if we look at the one on the Smallcombe Brook, now that's our River Avon that we looked at earlier. If I put the Smallcombe Brook on that to the same sort of scale, the Smallcombe Brook comes in from well up the hill, and we've got a great fall of water, but nowhere near the same amount of water that comes through the River Avon. So we've got a little bit of water for the great head, and so that's where an overshot or backshot wheel will come into play. And what we probably had at Smallcombe was, this is actually Finch Foundry at Sticklepath in Devon, and the thought is that what was in Smallcombe was a razor mill. In fact, that's still remembered in the lock there, which is on the old maps is called the Razamar Lock, so the razor mill. And this is Finch Foundry, and this is a gentleman at Finch Foundry sharpening a scythe. And this is where the expression nose to the grindstone comes from. That's how you would sharpen a blade. So that small mill in Smallcombe, which is just below where the bottom of Horseshoe Walk, where the canal pound is. So that is just below where the upper chimney is. So that's where Smallcombe razor mill was. I said it would have been something similar to what we had at Sticklepath. If we then look at the Lynn Brook, again we've got a large fall of water, but not a lot of water coming down there. And this is where the first mill at the bottom of that is the Claverton Street Mill. This photograph again on the right, it's one that looks familiar, but when you look closely, it's not familiar. Because of course we've got the toll house, which is still there, but the building behind it, that whole building, is what's left of the Claverton Street Mill. And its mill pond was across the road from there, where Nodes have now got their offices, which sits on top of a cistern, which if you go back 20, 25 years, was a public toilet. So that shows you the water coming through. And there is one of Peter Code's sketches of the mill again, so taken in the 1960s. It was the last building to go on that side of the river, or the canal, the river, before the road was widened. So most of that building is now under the lower bit of the road now. So that was the Claverton Street Mill. If we go up from there, you can follow the leads up round behind Claverton Street, up past along Prior Park Road, until we get to Bennett's Mill, also known as Broke Mill or Dead Mill, now a Honda garage, and that is the remains of that mill. And that was still in operation in 1927. And in 1927, it had a 8-foot diameter water wheel driven by the Lynn Brook. It had a milling plant on the first floor, on the ground floor, with a water-driven turbine. So we can see we've got a water wheel and a turbine. In the front of the mill, there was a gas engine. So if you ran out of water, you could then drive your gas engine. On the first floor, we've got 3 grinding stones. And then on the second floor, we've got a warehouse and then a power-driven hoist. So we can see it's very much like that early mill that we saw in the Little Salter. But now we've got 3 different types of driving it. A water wheel, a water turbine, and a gas engine. And if we go up to, on Gibbs' map, on Sir Thorpe's map of 1742, you'll see the Gibbs Mill. Now this picture is actually of a mill in Betsy Coed on the River Conwy. But that is something which I believe that Gibbs Mill must have looked like. If you know where the dell is, when you're climbing up to the bottom entrance to Prior Park, where the ground falls off, there's a footpath down there, and that's where Gibbs Mill would have been, and it would have looked something like that, with the water coming out of Prior Park along this flume to drive the water wheel. So I say you can't see that today, that's in North Wales, but that's something what I think Gibbs Mill would have looked like. Now, whilst we're in Lincoln and Wickham, I want to introduce this fellow, another chap who has probably forgotten, but Professor Andrew Weir of Glasgow University. He wrote a book called The Philosophy of Manufacturers, or an exploration of the scientific, moral and commercial economy of the factory system. A real snazzy title, jumps off the tongue. But he did a big survey of where industry was, particularly mill industry, across the country. And he did a census of where people were working. And in Lincoln and Wickham, he identifies that there were 565 people working in the wool industry. Down at Twerton, there were 284. So a sizable number of people still working in the wool industry on the other side of the river. If you go across to Frome, which we all know is a wool town, there's 730 there. So we can see Lincoln, Wickham and Twerton are comparable with Frome. Trowbridge, 600, Bradford-on-Avon, Trowbridge 1,000 rather, Bradford-on-Avon 600, Westbury 1,400. Those are sizable for the West Country. Go back to my home territory, West Yorkshire, 68,000. So we're small beer by comparison to West Yorkshire. But it's these people in Lincoln, Wickham and Twerton that I'm interested in. So this is down to Twerton, to the mills. And we've got the upper mills and the lower mills, 4 mills, one on each side of the weir. So if we go back to our 1850 Ordnance Survey map, what we can see is the cut with the lock. That's part of the Avon navigation, a little bit shortly. And then we've got the river to the upper weir, and we've got mills on the western side, mills on the Twerton side. Then we come down to the lower weir, where we've got mills on the western side and the lower mills again. So 4 sets of mills. Now, if we go back to 1742, we still see the same setup. 2 weirs and the cut, and we see a brass mill. More about a brass mill shortly. It was probably the brass mill that got me interested in all this. We can see a fulling mill on this side of the river. So more about what's going on there. So if we are on that map, we know we've got 2 mills on adjacent weirs. 1742, we've got 2 mills, 1 a fulling mill. The upper and lower mills developed independently. So that's what's happening at Twerton, at Twiverton. Back to our picture of, or our timeline, 1200s we've got fulling. This is the way it used to happen. First of all, carding and spinning. What this girl is doing here, she's got 2 carding combs, and she's taken the raw wool and she's carding it between these two pads with lots of pins in them, and that draws out the wool into fine slivers, so those can then be spun into yarn, and hence the term a spinster, an unmarried woman who would make yarn. And that is then taken into a hand loom, again very much hand driven. Here we have before 1785 a lady here who's actually weaving the cloth, and it's a very hydraulic operation. So that is how cloth is made. And this is the thing that becomes mechanised. So what we see in the 1790s, scribbling and carding and combing and spinning, what we saw that girl doing, is all starts to be mechanised. And then in the 1800s, the gigging and napping to turn your rough cloth into a felt is mechanised. And then the 1830s, we see weaving mechanised. And so it's what are those people doing in Lincoln and Wickham and in Twerton. This is actually a mill up in Yorkshire, but this is a mill driven by a water wheel, and we've got now multiple floors, and it's scribbling, carding and fulling. On the bottom floor, we've got the fulling with these big heavy hammers. On the floors above, we've got the carding and the scribbling going on, which is actually cleaning the wool up, ready to be turned into yarn. So that's an early mill up in Yorkshire, but we've got something like that going on at Twerton, probably 3 of those on different weirs. And then if we jump forward to the 1890s, this is Carr's Mill in Twerton, and this is a carding machine, probably at the height of mechanisation. And we can see rather than the girl with the 2 pads, we've got multiple wheels, lots with those pins on. We drive the wheels round, and that draws the wool out, ready to be spun. And at the other end, Carr's factory again at Twerton, 1890s, a power-driven power loom. So we saw that woman driving a single loom. Now we've got power driven off these belts at the top, and it's a high-speed mechanised operation. And you've probably got one woman now who can actually administer four looms. So that is the state of the art in the 1890s. So if we look at the upper mills first of all, that's this selection here. This is there's the railway. This is the Lower Bristol Road. This set of houses are still there. This is now student accommodation. This little row of houses here is still there to get your bearings. So you can see we've got the weir and the upper works. So looking at the timeline there, we've got a flour mill in 1086. 1742, Isaac Sperry's got a woolen serge mill. 1780s, making broadcloth. 89, we start to introduce scribbling, carding and spinning, and a gig mill. And this is the height of the rebellion against mechanisation. This is where the Luddites come in. And there is, the army are called out. There is almost a riot down there as they threaten to smash up the machines. But the Luddites disappear, and then we get it as a woolen mill in the early 1800s. It changes ownership. By 1807, we've got a 6-storey woolen mill driven by 2 water wheels. And then 1822, the upper and lower mills are united. And by the 1830s, we've got 67 steam-driven power looms there, supplemented by 300 outworkers. Now, those 600 people that we saw in Wickham and Lincoln were outworkers. So what was happening? They were probably had in the early period. They've got looms in their houses, and they're taking the yarn from the machines to weave it. And so we've got then to bring that into one site. We've got the woolen mill becomes steam-driven power looms, but he's still got outworkers driving their individual looms in their homes. So we can see this change of social status as we go from artisans working in their own homes to workers going into a mill. And if we jump forward into the 20th century, in 1903 we see 3 water turbines introduced. So we've now got water turbines. The mill was hit quite badly in the Baedeker raids, and the woolen mill closed in 1954. You probably remember it became a shoe factory, and then that end of the river was all swept away with the flood alleviation scheme. So there's very little evidence now of the mill. It then became an electrical factory, and the only bit you can see now is the entrance gate to the mill is still retained as a feature within the student accommodation on the Lower Bristol Road. And if we look on the other side of the river, on the western side, it's a flour mill. Then it's a brass mill operated by the Bristol Brass Company, one of 13 mills operated, that's the most westerly. There's also a steel mill, making a little bit like the mill we saw on the Smorcombe Brook, in that they are making edge tools. So we've got 2 metal industries driven by the same bit of the river on the western side. Then 1727, we see the Avon navigation, and that bit of land that's cut off by the navigation was known as Dutch Island. Dutch Island because the workers in the Bristol Brass Company mill were Dutch. They'd been brought across from what's now Belgium. There's a whole talk about that, so I will say no more about that. In fact, there's 3 talks about that, so we'll say no more about that. That closed in 1813 and became a logwood mill. The logwood was taking bark, dark bark from South America, and with another type of mill called an edge mill, broke that up, and that was for making dye. So again, we're still in with the woolen industry, but that closed in 1930. And again, that all went with the flood alleviation scheme. And this is the sort of thing that we would see there. These are the sorts of hammers that were at Saltford, and these would have been at Twerton. And also, this is an edge mill. This photograph is taken at Keynsham, where there was another edge mill. And what happens here is that the water wheel drives this overhead gearing, and that drives these 2 wheels which go round in a circle and crush the logwood to turn it into a fine pulp, which is then processed to become a dye. So that's an edge mill, again driven by water. And so that's what's going on at the top end. If we now come down to the lower end, bits we can still see, that bridge there still exists, and there's a pub. used to be the Unicorn, now the Locksbrook Inn, so they're still there, and this lock is still there. So here we can see the two sets of mills. That on the again, if you look at this timeline, we've got the flour mill. It then becomes a paper mill, crushing bark using probably an edge mill as to get the pulp for paper. Becomes a leather dressing mill. Probably what they're doing there is crushing oak bark to make tanning for the leather. By 1800, it's a woolen mill, a 5-storey mill constructed a gig mill and fulling stocks. So very much like that picture of the one we saw in Yorkshire. It's a woolen mill, changes ownership, but it's there through the early 1800s. 1819, we get a steam engine. It then becomes, 1890s, becomes a clothing manufacturer, producing finished suits. But that company was dissolved in 1965, and again, the site was taken over was swept away by the flood alleviation scheme. And if we go to the lower mill, again, there's another flour mill there, but by the 1790s, there's a woolen mill, Mr. Caldecott, a 6-storey factory, smaller than Mr. Bamford's on the other side, but the 3rd largest in the region, producing superfine broadcloth, powered by 2 water wheels. It's got high rewards as the wool industry, but also great losses. It goes bankrupt in 1825, sold by auctions to Cars. They build a new mill for the middle stages of wool processing. Remember what we saw about the process. And again, that carried on operating until the 1950s. But again, that evidence of that has gone after 74. And so there are our four sets of mills down at Twerton. Now, if you come around the corner, what we then see is the Avon navigation. That Ralph Allen and others wanted to make the river navigable from Bath out to Bristol and to the rest of the world. Ralph Allen in particular, because he wants to get his stone from his quarries out to around the world. And so that's where they formed the Avon Navigation Company, and they put a lot past each of the weirs. There's 7 weirs between Bath and Bristol. At Twerton, or Twiverton and Weston, they produced a cut to go past the 2 weirs. So that's why we've got a cut rather than just a long set of, rather than a single lock. So that's what it looked like in the 1730s. Today, it looks like this. And if you go on to the Historic England, it's a Grade 2 star listed structure. It will tell you it was opened in 1727. The engineer was John Padmore, and again there's a whole talk about what John Padmore got up to. And the promoters were Ralph Allen and John Wood the Elder. So you can see 1727, what we've got is we've got Ralph Allen promoting his stone around the world, and we've got John Wood coming down here, bringing things into Bath to see the Bath that we see today. So at that point, the talk could carry on, and we would follow the Avon navigation back up and onto the River Avon. But looking across at the clock, I'm going to stop there and take questions. But there is a whole extra bit to this tale as we go on to see how steam takes over from water and how steam loses out to electricity, and then how the flood alleviation scheme sweeps all evidence of those mills away. So over to you for questions, and I'll see what I can answer.
Thanks, Terry. We'll just get another microphone. And Caroline, if you'd like to do that side of the room, I'll do this. So there are any questions, and a reminder of people online, if you'd like to put it in the chat box, then we'll pick it up as well.
Hello. Lovely simple question. You mentioned meal men. Can you tell us what a meal man is?
Right, so
they're always in plural.
Right, so mealmen, in there, they are probably people who are using that mill to make meal for animal food. So we see the word flour mill, corn mill, grist mill. It depends what your output is. And in there, they are probably grinding the material quite coarsely, which is going to go to animal feed. So they're mealmen there. Not to be confused with when you look at the accounts of, say, the brass mill, there are millmen. and the millmen there are the people who are using the hammers to make pans. So yes, that's the clue is always there. You've got to look back a little bit as to what's happening at the time, but that's where a mealman comes from.
Do we know when there was first a weir on Pulteney, close to the mills? When did the weir come into existence? No?
Right, now with that, it's with all these things, the problem is to actually get archaeological evidence, you've actually got to destroy the weir. We pick it up in records that clearly by 1086 there are mills being driven by the river. So at that point, I think we're pretty confident that there is some sort of weir there. I think where the weirs come is probably where there's a natural shallows. I've looked at the one at, in fact, where the Avon navigation comes in, that it's certainly recorded in 1300. It was possible to get a boat from Bristol, a sizable craft, up to Bath. However, what happened was that the mill owners, to try and get more out of the river, raised the height of the weir, and so put a blockage on the river. And that was actually illegal. They got fined for that, but they were prepared to pay the fine, and the Crown was prepared to accept the fine to let them to do that. So the weirs have been raised higher and higher. I know I put that picture up of the wheel at Coverdale Mill. And I know at Coverdale about, was it 2 years ago, the weir is up on quite high up on the ground. And in the winter floods, it got washed away. So the mill lost its water supply. But they then had a two-edged problem. They needed to do an archaeological dig to work out when the weir got there. At the same time, they wanted to rebuild the weir to put the mill back into operation. So I think we can say for sure that there are sizable weirs there in 1086. Certainly they've been developed by the Saxons. We see them elsewhere around the country. I suppose the $100 question is, did the Romans have mills on the river? And again, because the weirs have all been built upon, it's difficult to actually get down to the bottom of it. I suppose we missed an opportunity in 1972 when they dug out the old weir to do a proper dig under the bottom, but that's all been swept away. So that's talking around the problem. I think we can say for sure they are sizable at the time of the conquest. I think the Saxons would have built them because they are certainly that capable. It's then a question, did the Romans have mills? Did they have them here? We haven't got the evidence. So how's that for talking around the question without actually answering it?
I've got a question online. Well, I'll read it out. Thank you for such an interesting talk. I'd heard about Bath superfine cloth, but hadn't found out where it was made. I'm also interested in Bath as a wool town. Would you have come across any sources where I could find out more?
On that, yes. I mean, there are quite a few sources around. I'd have to go and dig out my various sources. I suppose you start with Chaucer and move forward from there. It is quite reasonably well documented. Of course, it's the wool industry is at its height before the 1600s. So we've got good records of what's happening since then in the Industrial Revolution. And there's some good papers which you can still get online by Brenda Buchanan, who was part of the Bristol Industrial Archaeological Society. So there's quite good documents there about what's happening at Twerton and elsewhere. The records of what's going on in Bath are a bit scarce. I'm trying to think of I can't think of one particular reference that would give you the compact story, but it is one that it's documented around and about. The problem is when an industry dies, nobody's interested in it, and the records are a bit scattered far and wide, and you have to pull them together and interpret them. But certainly the processes, and it's interesting, the photograph I had of the girl doing the carding, that was actually a picture. She's in America, in not Virginia, I'm trying to think where it is, the old settlements there. They've got reenactments, and so they've reenacted what was happening. So it's interesting how they've, across the other side of the pond, they've probably done more research into how that actually happened. We think of woolen, and this is the Industrial Revolution, late 1700s, 1800s, but there's actually a whole new revolution down in the 1200s, and what's going on there.
Okay, and the other question was also asking about Bath Superfine. I've not heard of that.
That was probably a sales pitch by the manufacturer. With the cloth, what you can get is once you've woven the cloth, it's quite coarse. And the finer you make your thread, the finer you can make the cloth. From there, then you could leave it just as sacking, almost sackcloth. But if you've got good quality cloth, I mean, I'm wearing a tweed jacket, so this is quite close woven, and so this is a neck standard up. But what you could then do is take this and you put it into the fulling process. And that raises the nap, which raises all the fine, and so it swells the wall, so you can't see the gap in between the wep and the wharf. And then they use shears to cut off all the fluff that comes up. So you end up with a very smooth piece of cloth, and so that's where the superfine comes in. That if you think back to well, when I was at school, a woolen suit. It was hard to realise that was the same thing like a knitted woolen pullover, and that's where and so Savile Row are producing good quality suits with superfine cloth, and then the broadcloth is the width of the cloth, the width of the loom, and that's where Broad Street in Bath is where you've got broad looms working. So there's snippets of it around.
During the period you've been talking about, who owned the river and had responsibility for maintenance of the river?
Right, good question. Now, the ownership of the water is very valuable. So if you've got a mill, the supply of that water to the mill is paramount. And I know in the talk I do about across in the mills in Widcombe, that when the canal bit of the just below the garden centre, there's the canal bit of well, that if you look on the old maps, that winds its way down the contour. And when they built the houses there, the mill owner at what's now Claverton Street Mill had rights to the water, and in that they had to keep that canal bit 8 feet wide and 9 inches deep. So they weren't allowed to block the water, so they controlled the water. When it comes to the river, the mill owners own the water to the middle of the river. So if you've got a mill either side, you've got competing for the bit of the water in the middle. And so that's where the controls come in. You see down, for instance, down in Saltford, where the brass company had a mill at Kelston, and they bought the mill the other side of the river, not because they wanted to build another brass mill, but they wanted control of the water. So doing that, they could force all the water their way. So the water is very paramount. When the Avon navigation comes in, the two things happen. First of all, who owns the water now? Because you've got a third user. And it was by deed of Parliament, the mill owners had first call. And so if the river was low, the mill owners could actually go and lock the lock gates to stop the navigation and keep the water for the mill, much to the annoyance of Ralph Allen, because of the 6 weirs, how many? 1, 2, 4 of them are run by the brass company. And so the brass company have got Ralph Allen by the scruff of the neck, and there was no love lost between them. Also, another amusing one is that when they built the Avon navigation, they forgot to put in the Act of Parliament a towpath. And so they built the Avon navigation, and they came to pull their horses to pull the barges up. And I think in Norwegian it's called Pulteney Weir. They were told to go away. And so if you look at the old pictures, what you will see is the barges or trows have got sails, so they're under sail. They are going downstream with the tide, and when the wind and tide are against you, you have to hop out the boat, and then you see 6 blokes hauling the boat by hand up the river. And it was only when the Kennet and Avon Canal came in 1810 that the then Act of Parliament united the two, and that's when they put the towpath in all the way down. So not only was the water ownership problem, the mill owners weren't letting the horses come through their mill to pull the barges. So watership ownership is very key, particularly in Bath. There's on the other side of the river, ownership of water coming down from all the springs is very valuable, and so you see a lot of deeds being quite specific about keeping water ownership.
You showed the old power station. In about 2000, I managed to pull the stunt of blowing the company fuse on my house up in Foxton. And Western Power sent 3 men, one of whom was replacing the fuse, one of whom was holding the ladder up that the man replacing the fuse was on, and the other one was telling me about how good the canteen at Bath Power Station was, but he could never understood why they shut it. Which goes on to another question, which is to what extent is the river currently used for electricity generation, and what potential is there for electricity generation, if any?
Right, so with that, interestingly, if you look at the shape of the weir now, it's called a duckbill weir. It's sort of that big sweep. It looks very pretty, but it's that shape for a reason, because when you want the mills, what you want to do is to raise get the water as high as possible. Now what we want to do is to control the flow of water over there, so we don't get great deviations in height of river. So it's all about getting a smooth flow of water over the weir, and then the weirs down at Twerton, they actually now control the river level. And it's interesting, if you walk along the river today, if you go down to see them trying to lift these old boats out under the Skew Bridge, they've actually dropped the river level by about 5 feet, I think it is, something like that, controlling it from Twerton so you can get those boats out. If you look just over here, you'll see there's quite a bit of the bank now showing. So after the flood alleviation scheme, what we're doing is we are controlling the river to try and stop flooding. So the whole ethos has changed. In terms of potential for generation, I showed you those sorts of powers that the wheel down at Saltford could produce 10 kilowatts. Now my house, when it's on tickover, uses about 250 watts. However, switch the kettle on, and that's 2.5 kilowatts. So that dynamo can drive 4 kettles. We are very power hungry. And in the picture for the power station, and that was a small power station. In fact, I could even just sort of to show you some of the figures. Let's do it. This is what you're missing. There we go, that's a good one. Here we can see the sorts of powers we're talking about. So, and also we've got the problem here is what frequency do you drive? AC, DC frequency, what voltage? So there's a real struggle going on. But bearing in mind that 10 kilowatts from one wheel, 4 wheels, 40 kilowatts, 40 kilowatts up at Claverton, those 4 turbines down in another 50 kilowatts. Here we see we've got 1898, 375 kilowatts. We've got a diesel generator comes in, 450 kilowatts. 1923, you can see there that the amount of capacity coming in. 1930, we're up to 7 megawatts. So the whole scale, we become so power hungry that what we can actually get out of the river is it's smaller than one wind turbine. So it's good, but it's a very low scale. It's small scale. It's really going to drive one house. I mean, the reason why there's a dynamo at Saltford is that it was bought in the 1920s by a man called Eric Butler, who was a wealthy industrialist, but was also a keen sportsman. And he bought the mill and put a dynamo on it to drive to light his squash court. And so it was that squash court and the dynamo which saved the mill. But it shows you how that one dynamo could light a squash court and his house. So it's one of scale. And this is small beer by comparison to Hinkley Point. So it's one of scale. There is the potential there, but you see with the civil engineering to get a reasonable size turbine or water wheel, you've got to put an awful lot of effort in. And if you walk along up the river to Barthampton, there's a wheel there on the weir. That's called a Fouderoy wheel, which is a low head, high efficiency undershot wheel, and that supposedly runs continually. I walk past there quite regularly, and I would say 50% of the time it's not working. So by the time you've got all your maintenance and that, it's intensive in terms of input you've got to do to get the power out. So we've got to have lost our desire for power before this would become efficient.
Right, so we've got any more questions, or
Good.
are we done? I think.
Oh, one at the front here.
Oh, on the front.
Thank you very much for that. Not something I knew a lot about. So my question really is, when you're talking about flour mills, does this mean in Bath there are all these wonderful bakeries that are no longer here?
Yes, interesting. When you
Like nice fresh bread.
yes, what you can see is that we had these mills and quite a lot of mills, more than you might imagine around, and each one of those mills has got sort of three wheels. What we then see is, in fact, if I come back on this one a bit, that is what's now Borough Happold offices on the Lower Bristol Road. And what we can see is all these windows here. And what we were getting there, this is not that mill, but a similar mill. We can see we've got a steam engine here, and that's driving up, and you can see the number of mills that's been driven. And so what we've got, these are grindstones producing, like we saw before. Up here, these are roller mills like this one. And so what we get, and the reason why it's there is because the Avon navigation is still being used. So you can bring your grain in from around the world, bring it in and offload it from the river straight into the mill. From there, it's then ground, and from that it can either go back out by the canal, it can go down towards Bristol or up the way, or it can go by land to around. So, and I've forgotten the figure, but I think today, there's only 7 flour grading companies. So we've gone from, it's a bit like power stations. We've gone from the small to the huge. And so there we can see the sorts of where it goes. And in fact, there's another picture with here. That is there's the railway station, and there's the old bridge. And there we can see Kingston Mill, which is a steam-driven mill. So the steam-driven mill either side of it. There's the goods shed. That's where I forget what the bar's called these days, but that's where up on the top there. And if you jump forward to 1947, you can see how the electricity works has taken it completely, and the old electricity showroom's on the corner. So we can see how it's came to dominate. And there, the flour mills tend to be now out on the coast, where the materials come in bulk. With anything in bulk, if you can move it by water or by sea, far better than by lorry. And if you're coming back to this sort of age, far better than in a barge than on the back of a pack horse. So it is one of scale.
Okay, well, thank you, Tony. I mean, that was great. Very comprehensive. You really sort of dazzled us with your knowledge. So thanks once again.